He was just a single dad dropping his daughter off at daycare, a man trying to mend the broken pieces of his own life. What he didn't know was that the woman who owned the entire building was watching him from a hidden office, and he wasn't just another parent. He was about to become the one thing she couldn't buy or control. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The morning air was crisp with place. The promise of autumn, a gentle chill that hinted at shorter days and longer nights. Leo walked with his daughter, Maya's small hand tucked firmly in his own, her bright pink backpack bouncing with each step she took. He adjusted the strap of his own worn leather satchel, a nervous habit he'd never quite managed to shake. This was their first day at the Learning Grove, a daycare that had seemed almost too good to be true when he'd found the flyer pinned to the community board. At the library, it was clean, modern, and inexplicably affordable. A small miracle for a man whose budget was stretched so thin it was nearly transparent. Maya chattered beside him, pointing at a squirrel scrambling up an old oak tree, her voice a bright melody against the quiet hum of the suburban morning. Leo smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. He was tired, the kind of tired that settles deep in your bones, a permanent resident in the house of a single parent trying to be enough for two. As they stepped inside, the warmth of the building was immediate. The scent of lemon polish and something vaguely like fresh paint filled the air. It was calm, organized, a world away from the controlled chaos of their small two-bedroom apartment. A young woman with a kind smile greeted them at the front desk, checking Maya in with practiced efficiency. Leo knelt to give his daughter a hug, his heart giving its usual morning lurch, a mix of love and a quiet fear that never fully subsided. "Be good, kiddo," he whispered into her hair. She squeezed him tight. "I will, Daddy. Love you more," he said, watching as she skipped down the hallway without a second glance, disappearing into a classroom filled with colorful murals and the soft sound of children's laughter. He stood there for a moment longer, a ghost in the doorway of a life he was building, one day at a time. Just as he was about to turn and leave, his eyes caught on something in the corner of the brightly lit welcome area, a small wooden bookshelf, tilted precariously to one side, its top shelf sagging under the weight of a dozen picture books. It looked like a single screw had come loose, a simple fix, but a hazard nonetheless. Another parent might have walked past, another might have mentioned it to the front desk, but Leo was a librarian by trade, and a mender of broken things. By necessity, he couldn't just leave it. He glanced around. The lobby was empty for the moment. With a quiet sigh, he set his satchel down, knelt beside the bookshelf, and gently slid the books onto the floor. His fingers, long and careful from years of handling fragile spines and delicate pages, found the problem immediately. A loose joint, a weakened bracket. He reached into his satchel and pulled out a small multi-tool, a gift from his father years ago that he never left home without. With a few deft turns of a screwdriver and a quiet click of the joint settling back into place, the shelf stood straight and sturdy. Again he placed the books back in a neat row, their spines aligned just so. Satisfied, he stood, brushed the dust from his knees, and turned to leave. He didn't notice the dark-tinted window of the office overlooking the lobby, and he certainly didn't notice the woman who had been watching his every move, her hand frozen halfway to her morning coffee, her expression a mixture of surprise and something else, something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Curiosity. Ilara Vance sat in the quiet of her office, the two-way mirror in front of her, giving a perfect, unseen view of the lobby below. The space was her sanctuary, a minimalist cocoon of polished concrete and smoked glass, a world away from the colorful chaos of the classrooms on the other side of the wall. She'd built this place, this entire chain of affordable, high-quality daycares, from the ground up, pouring millions into a foundation that bore a name no one here would recognize. It was her penance, her purpose, her way of building, something that mattered in a life that had become a gilded cage. The man in the lobby was not what she expected. He was tall, with kind eyes, and the weary posture of someone who carried more than the satchel on his shoulder. His clothes were simple, worn, but clean, a faded chambray shirt and dark jeans. He moved with a quiet grace, a gentleness that seemed out of place in a world that rewarded noise and aggression. She had watched him with his daughter, the way he knelt to her level, the way his entire focus narrowed to the small girl in the pink backpack. It was a moment of pure, unvarnished love, the kind she usually only read about in the novels she collected, but rarely had time to open when he'd noticed the broken bookshelf. She'd expected him to walk away or complain. Instead, he'd fixed it without a word, without seeking praise or even acknowledgement. He just saw something broken and made it whole. It was such a small thing, a 5-minute repair. But in Ilara's world, nothing was ever that simple. Everything was a transaction, a negotiation, a move on a chessboard of power and influence. People didn't do things for free. They did them for leverage, for reputation, for the unspoken promise of a favor. Returned this man. He just did it because it needed doing. He slid the books back onto the shelf with the careful hands of someone who respected stories. His own satchel, she noted, was filled with them, its leather softened and cracked with age, a testament to a life spent in the company of words, not wealth. He didn't look up, didn't seem to notice he was being watched. He simply finished his task, picked up his bag, and walked out the door, the bell chiming softly. Behind him, Ilara stared at the space where he had been. Her coffee, growing cold on the desk beside her, she pulled up his file on her tablet. Leo Morgan, librarian, single father, daughter Maya, age 7. The information was sparse, clinical, but the man she'd just witnessed was anything. But she leaned back in her chair, the silence of the office pressing in on her for the first time. In a long time, Ilara Vance wanted to know more about a story that wasn't hers to read. The following morning, Leo walked Maya to the daycare with a little more ease. The first day jitters had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Maya was excited to see her new friends, and Leo was grateful for the quiet hum of a place that felt safe and nurturing. As they entered the lobby, he noticed a new face at the front desk, a woman with warm, intelligent eyes and a calm smile. She wore a simple gray dress, her dark hair pulled back in a loose knot. She looked elegant, but approachable. Not the typical daycare administrator he was used to. "Good morning," she said, her voice even and low. "Welcome back." Leo nodded, offering a polite smile. "Morning." He signed Maya in on the tablet. The woman watched him, her gaze lingering for a second on the worn strap of his satchel. "I wanted to thank you," she said. Leo looked up, surprised for what the bookshelf. She gestured toward the corner, where it now stood straight and sturdy. "I'm Ellie, the new director here. I saw on Fall of a Moxon Times say the security feed that you'd fixed it. You didn't have to do that." Leo felt a faint flush creep up his neck. "Oh, it was nothing, just a loose screw. I didn't want any of the kids getting hurt." "Well, we appreciate it," she said, her smile deepening. "It's not often people take the time to fix things that aren't their own problem." Maya tugged on his sleeve. "Daddy, can I go play now?" He smiled and kissed her forehead. "Of course, go have fun." As Maya ran off, Ellie leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping a little. "You have a wonderful daughter. She's bright and so kind to the other children." Leo's chest swelled with a familiar pride. "Yeah, she's the best part of my life." He said it simply, without embellishment, and the honesty of it seemed to catch her off guard. She held his gaze for a moment, longer than necessary. Her own expression, unreadable. Something flickered there, something more than professional courtesy, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "Well," she said, straightening up, "we'll see you this afternoon, Leo Morgan. Have a good day." Leo paused halfway to the door. "How did you know my last name?" She tapped the tablet in front of her. "It's on the sign-in sheet, Mr. Morgan." He nodded. "Of course, right. Have a good one." He walked out into the cool morning air, the brief exchange replaying in his mind. There was something about her, an intensity, a stillness that felt different. He shrugged it off as he headed to the library. chalking it up to a new boss, trying to make a good impression. He didn't know that the woman named Ellie was actually Elara Vance, and she hadn't learned his name from a tablet. She'd memorized it the night before while staring at a photo of a man who fixed things without asking for anything in return. Elara spent the rest of the day in a state of mild agitation. She sat through 3 virtual board meetings for her tech investment firm, nodding in all the right places and making decisions that would shift millions of dollars across continents, but her mind wasn't on stock options or quarterly reports. It was in the lobby of the Learning Grove, replaying a 2-minute conversation with a librarian who smelled faintly of old paper and quiet integrity. Her team noticed the shift. Her executive assistant Catherine had rescheduled a call twice, noting Elara's uncharacteristic distraction. Elara had built an empire on her ability to see 10 moves ahead, to analyze data and human behavior with a cold, dispassionate clarity. But Leo Morgan was an anomaly. He didn't fit any of the profiles she was used to. He wasn't trying to impress her. He wasn't looking for an angle. He didn't even seem to notice the subtle signals of wealth she couldn't fully erase from her posture or her speech. Had chosen the name Ellie on a whim, a softer version of herself, a name that didn't come with the weight of a Forbes list mention. She had worn a simple dress from a brand no one would recognize, and she had deliberately left her Audemars Piguet watch in the safe. At her penthouse, she had tried to be normal, and for a few minutes she thought she had succeeded. But the way he looked at her, with that straightforward, unassuming gaze, had unnerved her more than any high-stakes negotiation she'd ever entered. She wanted to see him again, not as Elara Vance, the reclusive benefactor, but as Ellie, the daycare director, a role she was beginning to find more compelling than any CEO title she had ever held. That afternoon, she made sure she was at the front desk when the parents started arriving for pickup. She greeted each one with a polite smile, her heart giving a small, erratic jump every time the door opened when Leo walked in, his satchel slung over his shoulder, and a tired look in his eyes. She felt a ridiculous wave of relief wash over her. Maya came running down the hall, a finger painting clutched in her hand. "Daddy, look, I made a rainbow monster." Leo's face broke into a genuine smile, his weariness melting away as he knelt to admire the artwork. "That's the best rainbow monster I've ever seen," he said, his voice full of warmth. Ellie watched them, a quiet ache settling in her chest. This was real. This was the kind of connection that couldn't be manufactured or acquired. It had to be grown, nurtured, protected. As they turned to leave, Leo paused and looked at her. "Have a good evening, Ellie," he said, using the name she'd given him. "You too, Leo," she replied, and the sound of her real name on his lips, even the shortened version of it, felt more significant than it should have. She watched them walk out the door, hand in hand, and knew without a doubt that she would be back at that desk tomorrow, waiting for another small moment. In a world that was starting to feel more like home than her own, the daily drop-offs became a quiet ritual for Leo and Elara. He would arrive with Maya just after 8, and Elara, under the guise of Ellie, would be there at the front desk, ready with a warm smile and a question about his day. Their conversations were brief, islands of calm. In the rush of the morning, he learned that she was new to the area, that she had a passion for early childhood education, and that she believed a good book could solve almost any problem. She learned that he worked at the main branch of the public library, that he had a talent for fixing not just bookshelves, but also leaky faucets and sputtering lawnmowers, and that his favorite part of the day was reading to Maya before bed. Their interactions were always carefully bordered by professionalism, but underneath a current of something else was beginning to flow. One morning, Leo arrived. Looking more tired than usual, there were dark circles under his eyes, and his movements were slow, as if weighed down by more than just his satchel. "You, okay?" Ellie asked, her voice softer than she intended. "Long night," he admitted with a sigh. "Maya had a nightmare, and the water heater decided to give up around 3 a.m. I've been tinkering with it since dawn, but I think the heating element is shot." She frowned. "That sounds awful." Is there anything I can do? Leo gave a small, humorless laugh. Unless you're secretly a master plumber. I think I'm on my own. I know a guy, she said quickly, a really good plumber. He's reliable and fair. I could have him stop by your place today. Leo's posture stiffened slightly. The offer was kind, but it felt too much like charity, a line he wasn't comfortable crossing. I appreciate that, he said, his tone shifting to something more guarded. But I'll figure it out. It's what I do. Ilara recognized the shift immediately, the walls going up, the pride that served as both his greatest strength and his most stubborn defense. She backed off instantly. Okay, well, the offer stands. If you change your mind, she said, keeping her voice light. He gave a tight nod and turned to leave the warmth of the Ronds. Their usual morning exchange replaced by a cool awkwardness, Ilara watched him go, a pang of frustration in her chest. She had only been trying to help, but she had forgotten that for a man like Leo Morgan, help could feel like a judgment. He had access to a world of resources. A phone call could solve his problem in an hour, but he lived in a world where problems were solved with tired hands and sheer force of will. She had overstepped, and she knew it. She spent the rest of the day feeling unsettled. Her mistake, replaying in her mind. She wanted to bridge the gap between their two worlds, but she was quickly learning that the distance was measured in more than just miles or money. It was measured in pride and the quiet dignity of a man determined to stand on his own 2 feet. She knew then that if she wanted to get closer to him, she couldn't offer to fix his problems. She would have to find a way to let him fix one of hers the next morning. Leo was quiet. When he arrived at the daycare, his greeting was polite, but the easy warmth of their previous conversations was gone. Ilara's heart sank a little. She had rehearsed a dozen apologies in her head, but none of them felt right. Instead, she decided to try a different approach. As he was signing Maya in, she spoke, her voice carefully, casual. Leo, I was wondering if I could ask for your help. He looked up, surprised, his guard still up, but a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. My help? She nodded, gesturing to a stack of new books on the counter behind her. We just got a new shipment for the older kids and, honestly, I'm a bit overwhelmed. I'm not sure which ones are appropriate or engaging enough. I know you're a librarian, and I was hoping you might have a moment to glance through them. Give me your expert opinion. Leo hesitated for a beat, studying her face. He seemed to be searching for a catch, a hidden motive. But Ilara kept her expression open and honest. Simple request for his expertise, not a handout. She wasn't offering him money, she was offering him respect for his knowledge and skill. Slowly, the tension in his shoulders seemed to ease. Yeah, he said, a small smile, finally returning to his lips. I could do that. I've got a few minutes before my shift starts. He walked behind the counter, setting his satchel on the floor. As he began to sort through the books, his hands moved with a familiar reverence, flipping through pages, assessing illustrations, reading snippets of text aloud in a low murmur. Ilara watched him, pretending to organize files on her computer, but her attention was entirely on him. She loved watching him, in his element, surrounded by the things he understood and cherished. He was confident here, his weariness replaced by a quiet passion that made his eyes light up. He set aside a few books, creating 2 piles. This one, he said, holding up a brightly illustrated adventure story, is a classic, great for read-alouds. This one, he pointed to, a more somber-looking novel, is a bit heavy for this age group, but this one, he picked up a thin volume with a simple cover. This one is special. It's about finding courage when you feel small. He looked at her as he said it, and for a moment it felt like he was talking about more than just the book. Thank you, Ellie, she said, her voice genuine. This is incredibly helpful. It's nothing, he said, shrugging, but the ease between them had returned. I'm happy to do it. Anytime. He picked up his satchel and headed for the door, pausing just before he left. By the way, he said, I fixed the water heater, took me all night, but it's running again. Ilara smiled. Good. I'm glad. And as he walked out into the morning, she felt a sense of victory that had nothing to do with closing a deal or acquiring a company. She had found a way to let him in, not by offering her world, but by asking to be a part of his. It was a small step, but it felt more significant than any leap she had ever taken. Alara decided it was time to move her base of operations. She told her executive team she was overseeing a hands-on review of the Foundation's flagship program, which was technically true. She just omitted the part about her personal interest in a certain librarian. She set up a small, temporary office in the back of the Learning Grove, a space that had once been a storage closet. She had it cleared out and furnished with a simple desk and a comfortable chair. It was a far cry from her sprawling penthouse office with its panoramic city views, but she found she preferred the faint sound of children's laughter filtering through the walls and the smell of crayons to the sterile silence of her corporate headquarters. Her new proximity to the Daycare's daily life gave her more opportunities to interact with Leo. Their morning book consultations became a regular thing. He would arrive a few minutes early, and they would stand together by the front desk, their heads bent over a new stack of stories, their shoulders occasionally brushing in a way that sent a jolt of electricity through Ilara's carefully composed exterior. She learned to read the subtle shifts in his mood, the slight slump in his shoulders when he was tired, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners. When he was genuinely amused, she found herself looking forward to these small moments with an intensity that surprised her. She started bringing in coffee for him in the mornings, not from a fancy cafe, but from the diner down the street. The kind that came in a styrofoam cup and was probably burnt, but it was a gesture he accepted without the guardedness he'd shown before. It was a shared ritual, a simple pleasure that belonged only to them. One afternoon, she saw him in the playground. During pickup, he was pushing Maya on the swing, his face tilted up toward the sky, a rare look of peace on his features. Ilara watched from the window of her small office, a quiet ache in her chest. She wanted to be out there with them, to be a part of that easy joy, but she knew she couldn't push too hard. She had to let him set the pace, let him decide when and if he was ready to let her cross the line from daycare director to something more. A few days later, a package arrived for her at the daycare. It was a small, brown-wrapped parcel with her name Ellie written in Leo's neat, blocky handwriting. She opened it carefully, her heart thumping in her chest. Inside was a book, a beautiful old edition of her favorite childhood novel, its cover worn and its pages softened with age. Tucked inside the front cover was a note. "This one reminded me of you," it said. "Strong and a little bit lost, but with a good heart. I thought it should have a home with someone who would appreciate it." It was the first gift she had received in years that wasn't a corporate offering or a calculated gesture of flattery. It was simple, personal, and it meant more to her than any jewel or stock option ever could. She held the book to her chest, the smell of old paper and the ghost of his touch clinging to it. And she knew in that moment that she was in, far deeper than she had ever intended to be. The daycare's annual fall festival was a chaotic swirl of color and sound. Hay bales were arranged in a makeshift maze. A table overflowed with lopsided pumpkins waiting to be painted. And the air was thick with the scent of apple cider and popcorn. Leo had volunteered to run the storytelling booth, a small corner of the playground, decorated with fairy lights and a comfortable old armchair. Ilara watched him from a distance as he read to a captivated audience of toddlers and preschoolers. His voice was a low, soothing rumble, weaving tales of brave knights and clever foxes. He didn't just read the stories, he became them, his expressions shifting with each character, his hands gesturing to emphasize a dramatic turn of events. Maya sat at his feet, her eyes wide with adoration, completely mesmerized by her father's magic. Ilara, wearing her simple Ellie persona, circulated through the Tachan's festival, chatting with parents and helping serve cider, but her gaze kept drifting back to Leo. She saw the way the other mothers looked at him, their smiles a little too bright, their laughter a little too loud. He was kind, handsome, a devoted father. He was a catch. And the realization sent a sharp, unexpected pang of something that felt dangerously like jealousy through her later, as the festival was winding down, and parents began to herd their sugar-fueled children toward the parking lot. Elara found Leo packing up his stack of books, the armchair now empty beside him. "You were a hit," she said, her voice soft in the growing twilight. He looked up, a tired but genuine smile on his face. "Yeah, well, kids are an easy audience, just give them a dragon and a silly voice, and they're happy," she chuckled. "You're good at it, really good. I think you missed your calling. You should have been a performer." He shook his head. "Nah, I like the quiet of the library too much. A stage is a lonely place." She tilted her head, surprised by his insight. "You sound like you speak from experience." He shrugged. "My wife was an actress. She loved the spotlight, loved the energy of a crowd. She was good at it too." For a while, his smile faded, a shadow passing over his eyes. What happened? He hesitated, then looked away. "It's a long story." She didn't push. Instead, she just stood there with him in the quiet, letting the silence say what he couldn't, the unspoken grief, the lingering pain. It was the first time he had mentioned his wife in more than a passing reference, and Elara felt the significance of the moment like a tangible thing. He was letting her see a piece of the story he kept locked away, and it felt like a fragile, precious gift. As the last of the fairy lights blinked off around them, he turned to her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "Thanks for today. For this whole place." He gestured around the now empty playground. "You've built something really special here." Elara's heart clenched. The praise felt both wonderful and fraudulent, coming from him. She wanted to tell him the truth, to confess that she was more than just Ellie the director, but the words caught in her throat. She was afraid of breaking the delicate trust they had built, of seeing the warmth in his eyes turn to suspicion, or worse, disappointment. So she just smiled and said, "I had help." And in that moment she knew she wasn't just talking about her team, she was talking about him. The walk to the parking lot was quiet. The air had grown cold, and the last vestiges of daylight had faded into a deep indigo sky. The sound of their footsteps on the gravel was the only noise between them. Maya had fallen asleep in Leo's arms, her head nestled against his shoulder, her face peaceful in the soft glow of the parking lot. Lights. Elara walked beside him, her hands tucked into the pockets of her coat, her mind replaying their blanks. Conversation by the storytelling booth. She could still feel the weight of his unspoken grief, the shadow of the woman who had loved the spotlight and left a void in his life. She wanted to ask more, to understand the story he was carrying, but she knew it wasn't her place. Not yet. When they reached his car, an aging but well-maintained station wagon, he gently buckled Maya into her car seat, his movements slow and careful, so as not to wake her. Elara stood by the passenger door, waiting, unsure of what to say next. The usual easy banter felt inadequate. Now that a more serious truth had been shared, he closed the back door and turned to face her. His expression was tired, but the guardedness had softened, replaced by a quiet vulnerability. "I haven't talked about her in a long time," he said, his voice low. "Not like that," Elara nodded. "I'm glad you did if you wanted to. I mean, it's just—" He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she was coming to recognize as a sign of his internal struggle. "It's complicated. She left us, Leo, not just the world, me and Maya. She said she needed a bigger stage, a different life. I wasn't enough. She walked out one morning and never looked back." The words hung in the air between them, raw and heavy. Elara felt her own breath catch in her chest. She had assumed his wife had passed away. The finality of that was tragic but understandable. But this abandonment was a different kind of wound, a betrayal that would leave deeper, more complicated scars. "Leo, I'm so sorry," she whispered her own past, a bitter echo in her mind. He gave a small, broken shrug. It was a long time ago. I've learned to live with it, but I've never learned how to trust that people will stay. That's why I keep to myself. Why I don't let people in. He looked at her, then his eyes searching her face. And that's what scares me about you, Ellie, because for the first time in a long time, I think I want to let you in. The confession was so unexpected, so brutally honest, that Alara was left speechless. She could feel the delicate foundation of their friendship shifting into something deeper, more terrifying, and more real. She wanted to reach out to touch his arm, to offer some kind of reassurance, but she was frozen. Caught between the lie of who he thought she was and the truth of who she really was, and she knew with a sickening certainty that the truth would only confirm his deepest fears, that she too was from a world that was bigger than his, and that people from her world never stayed. Alara didn't sleep that night. Leo's confession echoed in her mind, a constant refrain. I think I want to let you, in his words, were a gift, a terrifying, precious gift, and she felt like a fraud for accepting them. She lay in her penthouse bed, the silk sheets cool against her skin, the city lights twinkling below like a distant galaxy. But the luxury brought her no comfort. It only served to highlight the chasm between her life and his. She thought about his worn satchel, his calloused hands, the quiet dignity with which he moved through the world. He was a man who knew the value of things that couldn't be bought: loyalty, integrity, love. He was afraid she would leave. And the tragic irony was that her entire life was built on a foundation of leaving, of moving on, of acquiring and divesting. She was the embodiment of his greatest fear, and he didn't even know it the next morning. She drove to the daycare with a knot in her stomach. She had to tell him she had to come clean before this went any further, before his fragile trust was shattered by a headline or a stray news report. But when she arrived at the front desk, ready to confess, he wasn't there. One of the other teachers was at the desk. Hi, Ellie, she said brightly. Leo called in this morning. Maya's running a fever. He's staying home with her today. Alara's heart sank, a mixture of relief and disappointment. She told herself it was for the best. A reprieve, a chance to gather her thoughts. But she knew she was just procrastinating the inevitable. Later that day, her phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number, a photo of a pulse thermometer, reading 101.2 degrees, followed by a message, looks like the rainbow monster is breathing fire today. Sorry, we missed you this morning. Leo Alara smiled at the message, her fingers hovering over the keypad. She typed and deleted a dozen responses before settling on something simple. I'm sorry to hear that. Hope she feels better soon. Let me know if you need anything. The offer was automatic, a reflex. But as soon as she sent it, she regretted it. She knew he wouldn't ask for help. Not from her. But then his reply came a few minutes later. Actually, there is one thing. Could you recommend a good book for a grumpy, feverish 7-year-old? My usual arsenal isn't working. Ilara's heart lifted. It was a small thing, a simple request, but it was an opening. A thread of connection he was still willing to hold on to. I have the perfect one, she typed back. I can drop it by after work if you'd like. His response was immediate. That would be amazing, thank you. Ellie Alara spent the rest of the day with a sense of nervous anticipation. She left work early, stopping by a specialty bookstore to buy a beautifully illustrated copy of the book she had in mind. It was a story about a little bear who learns that it's okay to be grumpy sometimes, and that even on the stormiest days, the sun will eventually come out again. As she drove to his apartment building, a modest brick complex on the quieter side of town, she clutched the book in her lap like a talisman. She was terrified of facing him, of seeing the look in his eyes when she finally told him the truth, but she was more terrified of losing the fragile connection they had built. She had to believe that the man who fixed broken bookshelves and read stories with such heart would be able to see past the lie to the person who was just as lost and scared as he was. The apartment building smelled of old wood and the faint aroma of someone cooking garlic and herbs. It was a warm, lived-in smell that felt more like home than her own sterile high-rise. Leo lived on the 3rd floor, and as Ilara climbed the stairs, her heart pounded a nervous rhythm against her ribs. She clutched the book and a small bag containing soup from a nearby cafe, a peace offering. She wasn't sure he would accept. She knocked softly on the door, and it opened a moment later. Leo stood there looking even more tired than usual. His hair was tousled, and he wore a faded gray sweatshirt. He looked surprised to see her. "You came," he said, his voice raspy. "I said I would," she replied, holding up the book and the bag. "I brought supplies for the patient and her nurse." He hesitated for a second, then stepped aside. Letting her in, the apartment was small but tidy. Books were stacked in neat piles on every available surface, and a collection of Maya's colorful drawings were taped to the fridge. It was a space filled with love and stories. Not things. Maya was curled up on the couch under a thick quilt, a Disney movie playing softly on the TV. She looked pale and listless, but her eyes lit up. When she saw Ilara, Miss Ellie, she whispered her voice. "Horse, you brought the book." Ilara smiled and sat on the edge of the coffee table. "Of course. I did. I heard a certain rainbow monster was feeling a bit fiery today." She opened the book and began to read, her voice low and soothing. Leo stood in the doorway of the small living room, watching them, a strange mix of emotions swirling in his chest: gratitude, wonder, and a deep, unsettling fear. He was letting this woman into his home, into his daughter's life, and he knew almost nothing about her except that she was kind, and she had a way of making the world feel a little less heavy. After a few pages, Maya's eyes began to droop, and soon she was fast asleep, her breath evening out into a soft rhythm. Ilara gently closed the book and stood up. "She's sweet when she's not breathing fire," Leo said with a faint smile. Ilara chuckled. "She's sweet." Then, too, they stood in the quiet of the apartment. The only sounds, the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant murmur of the television. Leo looked at her, his expression serious and searching. "Thank you for this." "Ellie, really, you didn't have to. I wanted to," she said, her heart aching with the weight of her unspoken truth. "Leo, there's something I need to tell you." He nodded slowly, like he'd been expecting this. "Okay, but before she could speak," he held up a hand. "But not tonight. Let's just get through the fever first." Ilara wanted to argue, to push, to get it over with, but she saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the plea for just one more day of simple peace. So she nodded, agreeing to his silent truce, but she knew it was only a temporary reprieve. The storm was coming, and she could only hope they would be strong enough to weather it together. The fever broke the next day, and by the weekend, Maya was back to her usual bouncy self. Whirlwind of energy and endless questions. Leo seemed to relax as well, the tired lines around his eyes softening, the easy smile returning to his lips. He texted Ilara on Saturday morning, "A simple thank you for the soup and the book. You were a lifesaver." She smiled at the message, relieved that the fragile bridge between them hadn't collapsed. She was about to reply when another message came through. "We're heading to the park to burn off some of this pent-up energy. If you're not busy and wanted to join us." Ilara's heart leaped. It was the first time he had initiated a meeting outside of the daycare, a clear invitation into their weekend world, a world that had nothing to do with her role as Ellie, the director. She typed back instantly. "I'd love that." The park was a sprawling expanse of green dotted with ancient oak trees and a playground that had seen better days, but was filled with the sound of children's laughter. Leo and Maya were sitting on a bench near the duck pond when Ilara arrived. Maya spotted her first and came running, launching herself into Ilara's arms for a hug. "Miss Ellie, you came." Ilara laughed, hugging her back. "Of course I wouldn't miss a chance to see the passes." Ducks. Leo stood as she approached, a warm, genuine smile on his face. "Glad you could make it," he said. "It's a nice day for it." They walked along the edge of the pond, Maya skipping ahead to throw breadcrumbs to the eager ducks. The sun was warm on their shoulders, and the air was filled with the scent of damp earth and autumn leaves. It was a perfect, ordinary afternoon, and for Alara it felt like a miracle. They talked easily, their conversation flowing from books to movies to the probable absurdities of parenting. Leo was more open than she had ever seen him, sharing funny stories about Maya's toddler years and his own clumsy attempts at navigating single fatherhood. He was witty and insightful, and Alara found herself laughing more than she had in years. As they sat on a bench watching Maya on the swings, he turned to her, his expression growing more serious. "Ellie," he said, his voice low. "I know you wanted to tell me something the other night." She tensed her heart, starting its nervous rhythm again. "Yeah, I did," he nodded. "I have a feeling I know what it's about, but I want you to know something first." He took a deep breath. "Whatever it is, it doesn't change how I feel about you. It doesn't change the fact that you've brought something into my life, and Maya's, that I didn't think was possible anymore. I'm scared of it," he admitted, "but I'm more scared of losing it." Alara stared at him, her throat tight with unshed tears. His words were a gift of trust, so profound, so undeserved, that it broke her heart. She had to tell him now. She couldn't let him offer her this beautiful, fragile thing while she was still hiding behind a lie. "Leo," she began, her voice trembling. "The truth is, my name isn't Ellie." But before she could say another word, a voice called out from across the park. "Alara, is that you?" Alara Vance. Alara froze, the blood draining from her face. She turned to see a man in a tailored suit, jogging toward them, a predatory smile on his face. He was a reporter from a business journal, someone she had dodged for months. "Oh, this is perfect," he said, pulling out his phone and snapping a picture, the reclusive billionaire hiding out in suburbia. "And who's this? Your new pet project?" He gestured toward Leo, his tone dripping with condescension. The world tilted on its axis. Alara looked at Leo and saw the dawning horror in his eyes, the confusion hardening into a look of betrayal so deep it physically hurt to see the spell was broken. The beautiful, ordinary afternoon shattered into a million pieces, and the lie she had tried so hard to contain had just exploded in the worst possible way. Leo felt like the air had been punched from his lungs. Alara Vance, the name echoed in his mind, pulled from the glossy pages of magazines he'd shelved at the library, from business news segments he'd overheard on the breakroom TV. She was a titan of industry, a name synonymous with wealth, power, and an almost mythical level of success, and she was Ellie, the woman who'd brought him burnt coffee and read stories to his daughter. The man with the phone was still talking, his words a venomous stream of innuendo and speculation, but Leo didn't hear him. He was looking at Alara, at the panic in her eyes, the way she stood, frozen like a startled deer caught in the headlights. It all clicked into place. The expensive but understated clothes, the casual offer of a master plumber, the confidence that never quite fit her story. As a simple daycare director, he felt a cold wave of humiliation wash over him. Had this all been a game, a social experiment for a bored billionaire? Was he and Maya just a quaint diversion, a story she would one day tell at a cocktail party? In her real life, the reporter finally moved on, satisfied that he had his scoop, his story, his picture, that would be plastered across the internet by nightfall. The park suddenly felt silent, too quiet. The sound of Maya laughing on the swings now seemed like a distant echo from another lifetime. Alara finally moved, stepping toward him, her hand outstretched. Leo. He flinched away from her touch, his body reacting before his mind could form a coherent thought. "Don't he?" said his voice, flat and empty. The warmth of the afternoon had vanished, replaced by a chilling clarity. He looked at her not with anger, but with a profound and aching disappointment. "So this was the truth," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "She had a good book for a feverish 7-year-old. Because she owned the publishing house. She knew a good plumber because she probably owned the construction company that built half the city. Everything she had presented as simple kindness was just an extension of her effortless power. "You lied to me," he said. "It wasn't an accusation, it was a statement of fact." "I wanted to tell you," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "I was going to." Leo just shook his head. He turned and walked toward the swings, his back to a silent and impenetrable wall. "I think you should go," he said without looking back. He scooped a confused Maya off the swing, her laughter dying in her throat as she sensed the sudden shift in her father's mood. "Daddy, what's wrong?" "Nothing." "Sweetheart," he said, his voice tight. "Let's go home." He walked away without another word, leaving Ilara standing alone by the duck pond, the setting sun casting a long, cold shadow behind her. She watched them go, a father and a daughter, retreating into their small, safe world, and she knew she had just broken the one thing she had never intended to touch: his trust. The drive home was silent. Maya sat in the back seat, her usual chatter replaced by a watchful quiet she kept glancing at. Her father's rigid profile, the tight set of his jaw, the way his knuckles were white on the steering wheel, she knew better than to ask questions. When he got like this, it was a quiet storm, a wall of silence he built around himself. When he was hurt when they got back to the apartment. Leo went through the motions of their evening routine with a mechanical blank precision that was more unsettling than any outburst. He made dinner mac and cheese from a box, but he didn't eat. He just pushed the food around his plate with a fork. He read Maya a bedtime story, but his voice was a monotone, the words empty of their usual magic. She fell asleep, holding his hand, her small fingers clinging to his like she was afraid he might disappear. Leo sat by her bed for a long time after she was asleep, staring at her peaceful face. The guilt was a physical weight in his chest. He had let this happen. He had opened the door of their life, just a crack, and a storm had rushed in. He had been so careful for so long, building a world for Maya that was safe, predictable, and free from the kind of pain that came from people who didn't stay. He had failed her. He thought back to all of his interactions with Ellie, with Ilara, the book recommendations, the shared coffee, the way she had looked at him with what he had mistaken for genuine affection. It all felt tainted. Now, a cruel parody of a connection he had been foolish enough to believe in. He got up and walked into the small living room. The book she had brought for Maya was still on the coffee table. He picked it up, its weight feeling heavier than it should. He ran his thumb over the embossed cover. A beautiful thing, a thoughtful gift. Or was it just a careless purchase for a woman to whom money meant nothing? A woman who could buy and sell entire libraries. Without a second thought, he felt a surge of anger, hot and sharp. But it quickly dissolved into a deep, aching sadness. He wasn't just angry at her. He was angry at himself for wanting to believe in her, for letting his own loneliness cloud his judgment. He had known she was different. He had felt it from the beginning, but he had ignored the warning signs because he had wanted it to be real. He placed the book back on the table with a quiet thud and stared out the window at the darkening sky. The world felt a little colder, a little emptier than it had that morning. He had been a fool to think he could ever be a part of her world, and he had been a bigger fool to invite her into his Ilara. Returned to a world that no longer felt like her own. Her penthouse apartment with its floor-to-ceiling windows and minimalist furniture seemed cold and sterile, a museum of a life she had once thought she wanted. Her phone buzzed incessantly with calls and messages from her team, from the press, from the board of her foundation, but she ignored them all. She sat on a white leather couch that cost more than Leo's car and stared at the city lights below a glittering tapestry of lives. Couldn't connect with the picture, was everywhere online, the reclusive billionaire's secret suburban life. The headlines were a mix of snide speculation and breathless curiosity. They painted her as a flighty, eccentric woman, playing with the lives of ordinary people For her own amusement, they called Leo her charity case, her rustic escape. And every word was a fresh cut on an already open wound. Her assistant Catherine finally got through to her by showing up at her door. Unannounced, her face a mask of professional concern and personal worry. "Ilara, you need to make a statement," she said, her voice firm but gentle. "The board is in a panic, and the media is having a field day." Ilara just shook her head, her voice a hoarse whisper. "What would I say? That it's all true that I lied to a good man and broke his trust, that I fell in love with a life. I have no right to." Catherine's expression softened. "Oh, Ilara." She sat beside her on the couch, foregoing her usual professional distance. "I knew this was more than just a project. You haven't looked this alive in years." Ilara let out a shaky breath. "I ruined it, Kat. I had this one small beautiful thing, and I ruined it because I was a coward. Because I was so afraid of him seeing me as Ilara Vance that I never gave him a chance to decide for himself." "You can fix this," Ilara said. "Catherine. You can issue a retraction, clarify the story, use your power to protect him." Ilara looked at her, her eyes filled with a weary resignation. "You don't get it," she said. "It's not about the story, it's about the trust, and that's not something I can fix with a press release or a bank transfer." He looked at me like I was a person, not a headline. "And now, I'm just another person who lied to him, another person who proved that his world and mine can never truly meet." She stood up and walked to the window, pressing her hand against the cold glass. "I have to go back," she said. "Not to him, not yet, but I have to fix what I can. I can't undo the lie, but I can try to control the damage I caused." The daycare was the one place Ilara felt she could still do some good. It was hers, tangible, built with a purpose that went beyond profit. She arrived early the next morning before any of the parents or children, her presence causing a ripple of surprise among the parents. The staff, she ignored their curious glances and went straight to the small office she had claimed as her own. She spent the day on the phone, not with her investment team, but with her lawyers and PR specialists. Her voice was cold, commanding, the voice of Ilara Vance, the CEO, the powerhouse. She instructed them to issue a cease and desist to the publication that had run the photo. She had them draft a statement that was vague but firm, emphasizing her right to a private life and denouncing the invasive and speculative nature of the reporting. It wouldn't erase the story, but it might stem the bleeding. It might make the reporters back off. It was damage control, a skill she had honed over years of corporate crises, but it felt hollow. It wasn't about protecting her own reputation, it was about trying to shield Leo and Maya from the fallout of her choices. She knew it was a feeble attempt, a bandage on a gaping wound, but it was all she could do. From a distance late that afternoon, one of the teachers knocked on her office door, her expression hesitant. "Miss Vance, there's a parent here to see you," he says. "It's important." Ilara's heart stopped. She knew who it was. She stood up, her hands trembling, and walked out to the lobby. Leo was standing by the front desk, his back to her. He looked tired, worn down, but there was a new hardness in his posture, a resolve she hadn't seen before. He turned when he heard her footsteps, his eyes meeting hers with a cold clarity that made her flinch. "I'm pulling Maya out of the daycare," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. The words hit Ilara like a physical blow. "Leo, please don't do this. This place is good for her. It's safe." He gave a short, bitter laugh. "Safe," he repeated. "Nothing about you is safe. Your world just crashed into ours. And you call that safe? She deserves to be in a place where she's just a kid, not the daughter of the mechanic. The billionaire is dating." He spat the word out like it was poison. "I'm not dating you, Leo. I'm not anything to you anymore." He ignored her. "I've already enrolled her in another daycare across town. It's not as fancy as this place, but it's honest." Ilara felt tears welling in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. This isn't fair to her, Leo. You're punishing her because you're angry with me." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a low, intense whisper. "I'm protecting her, which is what I should have been doing all along." Instead of getting lost in some fantasy with a woman who wasn't even real, he turned to leave, then paused at the door. "One last thing," he said. "Without looking back, you can keep the book. We don't want it." He walked out without another word, the bell on the door chiming like a funeral dirge. Ilara stood in the middle of the empty lobby, the silence pressing in on her. She had lost him. She had lost Maya, and in the process she felt like she had lost the last real piece of herself. The weeks that followed were a study in gray for Leo. He and Maya settled into a new routine, a new daycare, a new rhythm. But the color had drained. From their world, the new daycare was fine, but it lacked the warmth and creativity of the learning grove. Maya never complained, but Leo could see it in her drawings, which were smaller now, less vibrant. She stopped talking about her new friends and started asking about her old ones. She would sometimes look up at him with her wide, perceptive eyes and ask, "Daddy, do you miss?" Miss Ellie. Leo would always deflect, changing the subject or pretending he didn't hear. But the truth was, he missed her with an ache that was constant and profound. He missed their morning conversations, the way she laughed at his stupid jokes, the quiet understanding that had grown between them. He missed the person he had been when he was with her, a little lighter, a little more hopeful. He threw himself into his work at the library, finding solace in the quiet order of the shelves. In the rustle of turning pages, he took on extra shifts, organized a children's reading program, and started a book repair workshop for the Rocament community. He was busy, productive, but he was also profoundly lonely. He kept seeing her everywhere, in the face of a woman in a passing car, in the title of a business magazine on the newsstand. He would quickly look away, his heart giving a painful lurch. He avoided the park, the diner, the dell, small pockets of the world that had briefly been theirs. One evening, he was reshelving books in the fiction section when he came across the novel she had given him. Its worn cover felt like a brand in his hand. He had told her he didn't want it, but in his haste and anger, he had forgotten to give it back. He opened it, and the note he had forgotten about fluttered to the floor. "This one reminded me of you, strong and a little bit lost." But with a good heart he stared at the quote. Words, her elegant script, a ghost on the page. He had called her a liar, a fantasy, but this note, this small, quiet gesture, felt more real than any headline or corporate biography. He sank down onto the floor of the empty library aisle, the book open in his lap, and for the first time since she had left, he let himself feel the full weight of his loss. He hadn't just lost a woman. He might have loved. He had pushed her away because he was afraid, and in his effort to protect himself from a potential hurt, he had created a definite one. Ilara poured herself into her work with a ruthless efficiency that scared her team. She was back in the boardroom, back in the high-stakes world of venture capital and international finance. She was sharp, decisive, and completely detached. She shut down the invasive media inquiries with a series of aggressive legal maneuvers and a single televised interview where she was so cold and formidable that the press quickly moved on to easier targets. She was Ilara Vance again. The woman on the magazine cover's the name that made markets move. But at night, in the silence of her penthouse, she was just Ilara, and she was more lost than ever. She had her foundation channel millions into expanding the Learning Grove model, opening new centers in underserved communities. She oversaw every detail from the curriculum development to the architectural design. It was good work, meaningful work, but it didn't fill the void that Leo and Maya had left behind. She kept the drawing Maya had made for her pinned to the wall of her home office, a colorful splash of innocence in a world of black and white contracts. She would sometimes trace the outline of the rainbow monster with her finger, her heart aching with a grief that had no name. One day, Catherine walked into her office with a tablet in her hand. Her expression carefully neutral. "I think you should see this," she said, sliding the tablet across the polished desk. It was a link to a local community blog from Leo's town. The post was titled "The Library Angel," a quiet tribute to a local librarian who had transformed the children's section into a librarian-like, vibrant haven for kids. There were pictures of Leo sitting on a colorful rug surrounded by children, his face animated as he read from a picture book. There was a video of his book repair workshop where he patiently taught kids how to mend torn pages and reattach loose bindings. There was a quote from a parent saying he doesn't just give them books, he teaches them to love and care for them. Alara scrolled through the post, her eyes stinging with tears. He was doing what he always did. Fixing broken things. Making the world a little better in his own quiet way. He was moving on and she was stuck a ghost in her own life. At the end of the post, there was a mention of the library's upcoming annual fundraiser. A small, community event to raise money for new books and programs. The date was 2 weeks away. Alara stared at it for a long time, a crazy, desperate idea beginning to form in her mind. She couldn't go back to him as Alara Vance, the billionaire. She couldn't erase the lie. But maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to support his world without ever stepping foot in it. Again, the library fundraiser was a humble affair held in the building's main reading room. The scent of old books mingled with the aroma of coffee. From a large urn and homemade cookies arranged on paper plates, people from the town milled about chatting and placing bids on silent auction items. A hand-knitted scarf, a gift certificate to the local diner, a signed copy of a local author's latest novel. Leo was in his element, moving through the crowd with a quiet smile, greeting regulars and thanking people for their support. Maya was his shadow, clutching a raffle ticket in her hand, and occasionally trying to sneak a cookie when she thought he wasn't looking. The event was a success, a testament to the community's love for their small library. But as the evening wound down, Leo knew they would still fall short of their fundraising goal. They needed a new computer system and a set of encyclopedias that weren't 2 decades out of date. Small things in the grand scheme of the world, but monumental for their budget. Just as the silent auction was about to close, the library's director, a kindly woman named Mrs. Gable, tapped Leo on the shoulder, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Leo, you need to see this," she said, leading him to the donation table. Sitting on the table was a simple white envelope addressed to the Learning Grove Public Library. Inside was a check. It wasn't a personal check. There was no name attached, just the logo of a generic-sounding philanthropic entity. The Orchard Foundation. The amount written on the check made Leo's breath catch in his throat. It was enough to fund their wish list for the next 5 years. Mrs. Gable was ecstatic, a true miracle. She kept saying an anonymous angel. Leo stared at the check, his heart pounding. He knew it wasn't a miracle. It was her, the Orchard Foundation. Learning Grove Orchard. He saw the connection immediately. It was a gesture so grand and yet so quiet. So typically Alara, she hadn't come, she hadn't called, she hadn't asked for forgiveness or thanks. She had simply seen a need and filled it from a distance, respecting the boundary he had drawn. He felt a wave of conflicting emotions, gratitude, awe, and a profound sense of regret he had pushed her away. Called her a fantasy, but her actions were more real, more tangible than anything he had ever known. He looked around the crowded room at the happy faces of his neighbors, at his daughter's bright smile, and he realized that Alara hadn't just given them money, she had given them a future, and in doing so she had shown him that her heart was just as big as her bank account, and he had been a fool to walk away from it. Leo couldn't get the check out of his mind. It was a quiet, powerful gesture that spoke volumes more than any apology could have. She hadn't tried to win him back with a grand romantic display. She had simply supported the world he loved, respecting the boundaries he had set while still showing him that she cared. The realization settled deep in his chest. a warm and unsettling weight. He had been so focused on the lie, on the difference in their worlds, that he had failed to see the truth of her character. She was a good person, a kind person who had made a mistake out of fear, not malice. The same fear that had driven him to push her away. He found himself looking at the old, worn book she had given Maya, the one he had told her to keep. He picked it up and ran his fingers over the cover inside. Her note was still tucked away, a whisper from a time that felt both a lifetime ago and like yesterday. That night, after Maya was asleep, he sat down at his small desk with a piece of paper and a pen. He wrote and crossed out and started again a dozen times, the words feeling clumsy and inadequate. Finally, he just wrote the truth. Alara, thank you for the library, for the books, for everything. You are not what the world says you are. You are the woman who brought my daughter soup when she was sick, who taught me how to laugh again. I was wrong to push you away. I was scared, and I let my fear make my world smaller. Don't know if it's too late, or if you've moved on. But if you haven't, I'll be at the park on Saturday, the one with the duck pond. I'll be there all day. I hope you'll come. He folded the note, put it in an envelope, and addressed it to the Orchard Foundation, hoping it would find its way to her. It was a long shot, a message in a bottle cast into a vast and uncertain sea, but for the first time in weeks, he felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't a plan, it was a prayer. Ilara was in a board meeting. When the letter arrived, Catherine brought it in on a silver tray. Placing it discreetly beside her laptop, Ilara glanced at the return address, or lack thereof, and saw only the name of her foundation. She assumed it was another grant proposal and set it aside, her focus on the quarterly projections being presented on the screen in front of her. It wasn't until she was back in her office, the city spread out below her like a silent, glittering map, that she finally opened it. Her heart stopped when she saw his handwriting, familiar and steady, even on the crisp, formal stationery. She read the note once, then twice, her vision blurring with tears. Her hands trembled. As she traced his signature, he was giving her another chance, a small, fragile opening back into the world she had broken. She looked at her calendar, a relentless grid of meetings, flights, and obligations that stretched for months. She could send a car, schedule a meeting, treat it like any other appointment, but that wasn't what he was asking for. He was asking for her, not her company. He was asking for Ellie, the woman who sat on park benches and threw bread to ducks. She buzzed her assistant, Catherine. "Clear my schedule for Saturday," she said. Her voice, firm and clear, everything. All of it. Catherine blinked in surprise. "Miss Vance, you have the International Tech Summit in Geneva. I can't just cancel that." "Yes, you can," Ilara said, her voice softening. "Tell them I have to go see a man about a duck pond." Catherine stared at her for a long moment, a slow smile spreading across her face. "Of course, Miss Vance," she said. "I'll take care of everything." Ilara stood and walked to the window, the letter clutched in her hand. She looked down at the city, but for the first time, she didn't feel trapped by it. She felt free. She didn't know what would happen on Saturday. She didn't know if they could mend what was broken. But for the first time, in a very long time, Ilara Vance was choosing hope over fear, and love over loneliness. Leo arrived at the park just as the sun was beginning to warm the morning air. He carried a small backpack with a thermos of coffee, a book, and 2 peanut butter sandwiches. He didn't know if she would come, but he had promised to be there. And Leo Morgan was a man who kept his promises. He chose a bench facing the duck pond, the same one where they had sat on that perfect ordinary afternoon. He settled in, opened his book, and waited. The hours passed slowly. The park filled with the weekend rhythm of families and joggers and dog walkers. Leo read a few pages, sipped his coffee, and watched the ducks glide across the water. Every time a car pulled into the parking lot, his heart would give a small jump, only to settle back into a steady, patient rhythm. By lunchtime, he had started to lose hope. Maybe the letter had never reached her. Maybe she had read it and decided it was too late. Maybe she had simply moved on. He ate one of the sandwiches, the bread feeling dry in his mouth. He thought about Maya, who he had left with a trusted neighbor, and wondered if he should just go home, admit that he had been a fool to even try. Just as he was about to pack up his things, a car pulled into the lot. It wasn't a sleek black sedan or a chauffeured town car. It was a simple, unassuming hybrid, the kind a teacher or a nurse might drive. A woman got out, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing jeans and a soft gray sweater. It was her Elara. She stood by the car for a moment, her eyes scanning the park until they found him. She didn't rush over. She walked slowly, her steps measured and uncertain, as if she was afraid he might disappear if she moved too quickly. Leo stood up, his book falling forgotten to the ground. They met halfway between the bench and the parking lot, the space between them filled with a year's worth of unspoken words and unresolved feelings. "Hi," he said, his voice hoarse. "Hi," she replied, her own voice barely a whisper. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said. "I wasn't sure you'd be here," she confessed. A small, tremulous smile touched her lips. They stood there for a long moment, just looking at each other, the noise of the park fading into a distant hum. Elara finally broke the silence. "I'm sorry, Leo, for everything, for the lie, for the hurt. I was a coward." He shook his head. "No. You were scared. So was I. I shouldn't have pushed you away. I should have trusted you. I should have trusted us." She took a tentative step closer. "Is there still an us?" He reached out and took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers, warm and solid. "I hope so," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "because I've missed you every single day." Ilara's eyes filled with tears, but this time, she didn't try to hide them. She squeezed his hand, a silent promise passing between them. It wasn't a perfect ending. It was a messy, complicated, and beautiful beginning. And as they stood in the middle of the park, with the ducks as their witness, they both knew that this time they would be strong enough to weather any storm. As long as they did it together, they started slowly, tentatively, like two people learning to walk again after a long illness. They spent the rest of that Saturday at the park, not talking about the past, but about the future, about a world where their two lives could intersect. Without colliding, they met for coffee the next week, and then for dinner the week after that. Elara didn't hide who she was, and Leo didn't shy away from it. They talked about her work, her foundation, the immense pressure of her world, and they talked about his life, the quiet joys of the library, the challenges of raising Maya on his own. They learned to navigate the differences between them with honesty and a newfound sense of humor. Elara introduced Leo to her world, not with a grand flourish, but with quiet, carefully chosen moments. She brought him to a gallery opening, not as her date, but as a friend, a consultant on the new children's art wing she was funding. He, in turn, brought her into his. He taught her how to properly mend the spine of a broken book, his hands guiding hers with a gentle patience that made her heart ache. She came to his apartment for dinner, and this time she helped him cook, laughing as they burned the garlic bread and set off the smoke alarm. Maya was the bridge that connected them, her innocent love, for both of them, smoothing over the awkward silences and healing the lingering wounds. She didn't care about headlines or bank accounts. She just knew that Miss Ellie made her dad smile. And that was all that mattered. One evening, they were sitting on the couch in Leo's apartment, Maya asleep in her room, the soft glow of a reading lamp casting a warm circle of light around them. Elara was curled up against his side, her head resting on his shoulder, a book open in her lap. It was a scene of such simple, domestic peace that it brought a lump to Elara's throat. "I have an idea," she said, her voice soft. "I want to expand the foundation. I want to build libraries, not just daycare centers, community hubs, places where people can find stories and connection, and I want you to run it." Leo sat up, turning to look at her, his expression a mix of shock and disbelief. "Me," he said. "I'm a librarian, Elara." "Not a CEO, you're a builder," she replied, her eyes shining with a fierce conviction. "You build worlds with words. You fix what's broken. You see the value in things that other people overlook. You are the most qualified person I know." He stared at her, speechless. She was offering him a world he had never dared to dream of, not as a handout, but as a partner. An equal, it was a gesture of trust, so profound that it erased the last vestiges of his fear and doubt. "Okay," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Okay." The new library was a masterpiece of glass and warm wood. A modern cathedral dedicated to the power of stories. It was built in the heart of the city, in a neighborhood that had been forgotten for too long, a beacon of hope and renewal. The grand opening was a huge event, attended by the mayor, city council members, and a swarm of press. But Ilara and Leo weren't on the main stage. They were in the children's section, a vibrant, colorful space that Leo had designed himself, right down to the lopsided, comfortable armchairs and the reading nooks tucked into unexpected corners. Ilara was sitting on a low stool, a picture book in her hands, reading to a small group of captivated children. Her voice was warm and animated, a far cry from the cold, commanding tone she used in the boardroom. Leo stood nearby, watching her, a proud, loving smile on his face. Maya was beside him, holding his hand, her eyes shining as she watched the two most important people in her world together. Later, after the crowds had thinned and the speeches were over, they stood alone in the quiet of the library. The scent of new books and fresh paint hanging in the air. The city lights twinkled through the massive windows, a distant, glittering backdrop to their own small, perfect world. "You did this," Ilara said, gesturing around the beautiful space. "No," she said, taking his hand. "We did this." They stood in silence for a long moment, their fingers intertwined, a comfortable, easy rhythm between them. The past year had been a journey of healing, of learning to trust again, of building a bridge between two worlds that had once seemed impossibly far apart. "I love you, Leo Morgan," she said, her voice soft. "But sure, I love that you're a man who fixes broken things, who sees the good in the world, and who taught me how to be a part of it." "I love you, Ilara Vance," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I love that you're a woman who builds libraries, who fights for the underdog, and who saw the best in me. Even when I couldn't see it myself." He leaned in and kissed her. A slow, deep kiss that was a promise of a future filled with love, laughter, and a million more stories yet to be written. And as the lights of the city glittered on, they knew they had finally found their way home, not in a place, but in each other.